Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps keep these stories coming. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Robert, and I work the graveyard shift at a city morgue. I've always found a certain quiet comfort in the solitude of late nights and early mornings. The halls are still, and my only companions are the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of old machines. Being a forensic scientist isn't the ideal job for everyone, but I've always been able to handle what most find unsettling. I examine what remains of someone's final moments in hopes that my findings might help the living. It's clinical, methodical, and for me, oddly peaceful. Late one evening, I arrived at my lab just before midnight. I remember setting down my coffee on the old metal counter. The night shift nurse, Nora, greeted me with a tired smile. She'd been rushing between rooms all day, and her eyes looked hollow with exhaustion. "Busy night?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. She sighed and nodded. "I wouldn't call it busy, more like strange. People are being brought in from all over the city. Something's going around." We exchanged only a few words before parting ways, because neither of us could spare much time. I put on my lab coat, sanitized my hands, and prepared to review the paperwork for the night's new arrivals. That's when I noticed the sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the hall, accompanied by frantic voices. A pair of paramedics pushed a stretcher in my direction. On it lay someone who seemed far too still. I've seen my share of grim arrivals, accidents, natural causes, the occasional emergency scenario, but something about the expressions of those paramedics caught my attention. One of them, a tall man whose name tag read Hunt, waved me over. "We had a call about a person acting strangely," he told me. "By the time we arrived, they were on the ground. No heartbeat. But—" His voice trailed off as though he couldn't find the right words. "But what?" I pressed, glancing at the stretcher. Hunt shook his head. "I don't know how to explain it. We couldn't get a pulse, so we moved them into the ambulance. Then, just before we got here, they moved." I leaned in closer. The figure on the stretcher looked pale, with shallow cuts on their arms and neck. Their breathing was barely noticeable, if it existed at all. My first instinct was to assume there had been a mistake. Perhaps the paramedics had misread some involuntary muscle spasm. Yet the paramedic's tense face told me there was more to it than that. We carefully transferred the body onto a table in my lab. The paramedics left hurriedly, muttering that there were more calls to answer. I began my preliminary exam, checking for any signs of typical causes of passing. Nothing about this individual was typical. The temperature of the skin was much lower than normal. There were faint marks on the neck, like shallow discolorations, and I couldn't confirm a regular heartbeat even with my stethoscope. My mind raced through possibilities. A severe illness, some new kind of contamination, or perhaps a very unusual condition. I made notes in my files, expecting I'd have to run a full analysis soon. That's when I got a call from the front desk. A different paramedic was on the line, short of breath. "We have another one," he said. They're on their way up now." Before I could respond, the call ended. I stepped out of my lab and peered down the corridor. 2 more stretchers arrived, each carrying unresponsive individuals. Their symptoms were disturbingly similar. Extremely low body temperatures and shallow signs of life. My colleagues and I sprang into action, placing them in separate examination rooms. I'd never encountered so many mysterious arrivals in one night. At that point, Nora poked her head in. Her face was pale. "Robert, have you turned on the news? Or the radio?" she asked. "Not yet. I've been busy," I replied. "Why?" "You'd better do it," she said. Then she hurried away toward the office area, where the main phone lines were located. Curiosity gnawing at me, I switched on the small television in my lab. The local news station was broadcasting some kind of emergency alert, advising citizens to remain indoors. The anchor mentioned rising chaos at hospitals and public services. Doctors were advising everyone to minimize contact and watch for unusual symptoms. The broadcast was more confusion than clarity. Still, it confirmed one thing: the entire city was dealing with something big. I was about to turn the volume up when I heard a faint sound from behind me. It was like a soft knock on metal. I spun around. The person who'd just been brought in, who looked nearly gone, was now moving a hand across the examination table. In my line of work, I'm used to reflex actions, post-mortem twitches. But this was different. The patient's eyes were half open, the limbs shifting in a deliberate, if sluggish, manner. It was as if they were in a trance, struggling to move but still attempting it. Carefully, I approached, calling out to see if they were conscious or aware. No response. Their gaze seemed unfocused, almost hollow. I backed away slowly and picked up my phone to call for assistance. The line was busy. I tried Nora's extension. No luck. An uncomfortable feeling settled in my chest. I left the examination room, locked the door, and hurried through the hallway. I could hear hushed voices near the ambulance bay. Before I could get there, a series of loud crashes echoed down the corridor. I rushed in that direction and found 2 orderlies sprawled on the ground, trying to keep another patient, one of the recently brought-in arrivals, from grabbing them. All 3 scrambled to their feet. The patient's motions were disjointed and erratic. One of the orderlies shouted my name, begging for help. My instincts kicked in, first, ensure everyone's safety. We managed to guide the patient back onto a stretcher, and the orderlies restrained their arms gently. I checked the patient's vitals. Again, almost no heartbeat, no normal breathing. Yet, they were clearly moving in a determined way, as if powered by something beyond normal human function. I was shaken, but I had to keep working. This was my job, after all, to find answers in the face of uncertainty. I directed the orderlies to place the patient in a secure examination room. We fastened the door, though I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt treating a person like a danger. But at that moment, we had no choice. Once everything was as stable as possible, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The city night was quiet, except for the faint sound of distant sirens. Usually, I'd see a handful of taxis or a lone bus at that hour. But there was almost no activity on the streets. The eerie calm felt like the world had taken a sudden pause, holding its breath for whatever came next. Back inside, I realized the front desk was empty. I couldn't locate Nora, the paramedics, or the security guard who typically made rounds. My phone had several messages from unknown numbers, each one mentioning the same advice: shelter in place, lock the doors, emergency state declared. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. Despite everything, I tried to remain systematic. I labeled each new patient, took quick notes, and placed a priority alert on my computer so local law enforcement or epidemiologists could access my reports. Right as I started typing, all the lights flickered. The computer screen blinked. Then the electricity vanished. The emergency backup generators kicked in, bathing the corridors in dim, humming lights. The temperature in the lab slowly began to rise without the full power to the cooling systems. At first, I told myself this was only a brief outage. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the power might not be coming back anytime soon. Walking through those now shadowy halls, I made my way to the morgue's main generator room. It was an area I seldom visited, but I wanted to confirm it was running properly. Without it, we would lose not just lights, but also crucial ventilation and communication systems. To my unease, the door stood ajar, and I could hear a strange scraping sound from inside. I inched closer, calling out, "Hello, anyone in there?" No one answered. Cautiously, I stepped inside. The generator chugged along, providing a low level of power. That scraping sound, however, was coming from behind a supply shelf. I reached for the flashlight clipped to my belt and shone it around the room. That's when I saw him. A maintenance worker whose face I recognized, but whose name I couldn't recall. He was lying on his side, eyes half open, hand scratching weakly at the ground. I called his name, uncertain if he was still with us. No reaction, except for a stifled, uneven breath. As I moved closer, he slowly turned his head in my direction, but his eyes didn't meet mine. It was as though he was staring right past me. Something about his appearance reminded me of the new arrivals we'd received that night. An involuntary shiver coursed through me. I had no idea how to help him. His breathing was shallow, and he looked disoriented. Worried that he might suddenly become agitated, I backed away, hoping to find a first aid kit or some form of help. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost dropped my flashlight in alarm. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, so I answered quickly, hoping it was an official call. "Robert, is that you? It's Nora." I couldn't hide my relief. "Yes, I'm here. Are you safe?" I'm on the second floor. Listen, we have a problem. People are panicking. Some of the patients are moving around when they shouldn't be able to. The phone lines are overwhelmed. I tried calling the police, but no one's picking up." It dawned on me that the outbreak was far more widespread than I'd imagined. "Stay where you are," I told her, my voice shaking slightly. "I'll come find you." I left the maintenance worker in the generator room for the moment, making sure to prop the door open. The hallway was eerily still, lit only by the reddish glow of emergency fixtures. Doors that had been locked earlier were now open, and I saw no sign of the orderlies or paramedics. Perhaps they'd gone elsewhere for help. I hurried up a flight of stairs to the second floor. There, the usually buzzing nurses' station stood silent, only faintly illuminated. I spotted Nora crouched behind a desk, cradling a portable radio in her arms. She looked up with wide eyes, relief and worry in her expression. "Robert, I'm so glad to see you," she whispered. "I can't reach anyone. The radio broadcasts are turning into static." Before I could respond, another figure emerged from a dim hallway, one of the new patients lurching forward as if half awake. Nora froze. The patient seemed unaware of us, moving unsteadily past the station and disappearing around a corner. We exchanged anxious glances, neither wanting to provoke them. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. I weighed our options. "We need to find a secure place. This floor is too open." We decided that the office area in the West Wing might be safer because it had fewer entry points and thicker doors. With Nora beside me, I moved carefully. Along the way, we saw a couple of other hospital workers, just glimpses in the flickering lights, huddling in rooms, too frightened or confused to move. The entire facility felt like it was caught in a strange limbo. No instructions were coming. No rescue teams. Only the hum of the backup generators and the distant echoes of something we couldn't fully understand. In the office area, we found a conference room that could be locked from the inside. We slipped in and secured the door. The interior was small, with a heavy table and a few chairs. There was one frosted glass window looking out into the hall, but no one seemed to be there. The clock on the wall read just after 2 a.m. I realized only a couple of hours had passed since the first odd arrival. It felt like days. Nora and I took a moment to gather our thoughts. She looked at me expectantly, as if hoping I had answers. "I don't know what's causing this," I admitted. "It could be some type of unknown illness. The people who come in, they're cold to the touch, with almost no pulse, but then they start moving like they're in a daze." Nora bit her lip. The news reports mentioned a word, outbreak, but no specifics. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation pressing in on us. Finally, I remembered that my phone still had some battery left, though the signal was spotty. I dialed a contact from the public health department. No answer. I tried the police station's direct line, nothing, just static. We began to hear faint noises beyond the door, scuffling footsteps, distant thumps. Then, in the corridor, a muffled cry for help. Nora and I exchanged worried looks. We couldn't simply ignore someone in distress. Quietly, we unlocked the conference room and peered outside. A security guard was at the far end of the hall, waving at us to come over. He looked unharmed, though clearly shaken. We rushed toward him, trying to maintain silence. They're all over the place," he said, voice trembling. "Some staff, some new arrivals. I can't figure out what's happening." I told him about the paramedics, the patient's low vital signs, and the bizarre behavior. He confirmed that multiple calls for emergency assistance had gone unanswered. I tried contacting the city's main grid, he added, but the phone systems are failing. It's not just here, it's everywhere. All at once, an overhead speaker crackled to life, cutting through the tense hush. The volume was faint, but I could make out fragments of an automated message. "Remain indoors. Follow official instructions. This is a citywide alert." Then the speaker went dead again. The guard stared at me, a question in his eyes. "Do we stay, or do we try to leave?" I glanced at Nora. The morgue was my domain, but with no real guidance from the outside, it was hard to know what was safest. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but if we leave, we risk running into the unknown outside. At least here, we can seal off rooms, keep some measure of control." He nodded, looking only half convinced. We decided to gather anyone we could find who was still functioning normally and bring them to the office wing. Safety in numbers. Nora stayed with me while the guard set off to find others. We carefully moved through corridors, calling out in low, steady voices for any staff or visitors. In one hallway, the lights had completely failed. We navigated by flashlight and found a nurse crouched against the wall. She looked up at us, startled, then staggered forward, clinging to my arm. She'd been in the pediatric ward when the power went out. She managed to usher the few people there to a secure room before making her way toward the main section. We told her about our plan, and she agreed to join us. We continued, floor by floor, guiding anyone we found to the second-floor conference room. By the time we finished our makeshift sweep, we had 6 people huddled inside. Nora, the security guard, 2 nurses, and a pair of administrative staff who'd been trapped in a supply closet when the lights went out. We pushed a table against the door and settled into an uneasy wait. My watch read 3:30 a.m. The building was eerily quiet now, broken only by the occasional mechanical clang of the generator and intermittent footsteps in distant corridors. Every so often, we heard a distant thud or a muffled groan that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It felt like we were in the eye of a storm, safe for the moment, but surrounded by chaos. An hour crawled by, then 2, and none of us dared to sleep. Around sunrise, thin beams of daylight began to filter through the frosted window. The battery on my phone was nearly gone, but I used the last bit of power to check for any new messages. There was one, time-stamped just a few minutes earlier from the health department's alert system. Outbreak confirmed citywide, shelter if possible, public services at capacity, avoid contact with individuals showing unresponsiveness or irregular behavior. Reading those words sent a chill through me. The same stark warnings repeated in all the bulletins I'd seen. We were on our own. Nora and I whispered about our next move. It was nearly 6 a.m. 12 hours had passed since that first unusual patient arrived. The hospital, once a place of bustling activity, had fallen into a silent, tense hush. We agreed that we couldn't just wait indefinitely. Medical supplies and food were limited, and we had no idea what was happening beyond those walls. Still, leaving was risky. For now, the conference room seemed secure, and we had each other for support. I decided that if help didn't arrive, we'd venture out later in the day to see if neighboring buildings had more reliable communication lines or perhaps some form of assistance. Everyone in that room understood we might be stepping into a world changed beyond recognition, but we had no other option. Looking around at the small group, I remembered the countless nights I'd spent in calm solitude, thinking I understood life and the mysteries of passing. Now, with dawn's light creeping in, I realized how quickly everything can shift under your feet. We weren't just dealing with an outbreak, we were dealing with an unknown force that defied our best medical logic. In the end, what truly mattered was the resolve to keep moving forward, supporting one another in an environment filled with confusion. We chose to keep our spirits focused, to figure out a plan, and to face whatever this outbreak truly was. If we survived those first 12 hours, maybe, just maybe, we'd find a way to survive the rest of it. That's my story for now. As we sit here, waiting for new developments, I'm documenting everything I saw and heard, hoping that one day it might help the experts figure out what went wrong. The entire city is holding its breath, and I'm doing the same, but I haven't lost hope. Those of us in this conference room, healthcare workers, security staff, administrators, we're determined to hold on, because in the aftermath of any great unknown, there's always a chance that our resilience will shine through the darkness. No matter what comes next, I'll remember these last 12 hours for the rest of my life. If you're hearing this, take caution, help one another, and remember that in the quietest hours, when the world seems darkest, you might just discover how powerful a glimmer of hope can be. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more creepypastas. Your support means a lot. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you in the next one.